But we're going to begin tonight with never-before-seen video from the day that has so defined our lives for almost 3 years, 9/11. It shows the hijackers who took the airliner into the Pentagon as they went through security at Dulles Airport. NBC senior investigative correspondent Lisa Myers is in Washington tonight with that story. Lisa?
Tom, NBC News has obtained a videotape from security checkpoints at Dulles Airport recorded September 11th, 2001, and never before seen by the public. The tape reveals the hijackers set off alarms repeatedly, but quickly were cleared to proceed to their flight. September 11th, Dulles Airport. At 7:18 a.m., two hijackers approach the security checkpoints. They are Majid Moked and Khalid Al-Midhar. Both set off the alarm and are directed to a second magnetometer. Moked fails again and is wanted by hand. Both are allowed to proceed to their flight. 7:35 a.m. It's pilot Hani Hanjour's turn. He breezes through without triggering any alarms. 1 minute later, Nawaf and Salem Al-Hazmi enter the same checkpoint. Salem sails through, but Nawaf sets off the alarm of the magnetometer, not once but twice, and is then wanded by hand before being cleared. The 9/11 Commission reviewed this tape, never before made public.
All 19 hijackers were able to pass successfully through checkpoint screening to board their flights. They were 19 for 19, 100%. They counted on beating a weak system.
The commission says the hijackers managed to sneak on box cutters, and investigators say they almost certainly used Leatherman utility knives. It is not clear from the videotape where the weapons were hidden. At 8:20, American Flight 77 took off from Dulles, headed west. At 8:54, it made an unauthorized turn to the east. At 9:38, the terrorists crashed it into the Pentagon, killing 64 on the plane and 125 on the ground. This tape of Dulles hijackers making their way through airport security is one more piece of evidence. Frustrated investigators see it as one of a series of missed opportunities, right up to the last moments before the attacks, that might have changed history, Tom.
The file dropped on Robert Fuller's desk. It was a small dossier, which had photographs and names of two men which Fuller had to look into. It was a high-priority case. The FBI's New York office was the epicenter for Islamic fundamentalism since its inception of the I-49 unit back in 1996. The elite brand, which catered to a specific investigation into the finances and unique, intricate terrorist activities of Osama bin Laden. Fuller was the only one tasked to look into the Al-Qaeda operatives Khalid Al-Midhar and Nawaf Al-Hazmi. It was August 23rd, 2001, but Fuller had other cases to also investigate. It was not a high priority case in regards to a criminal case, but for immigration. Thus, the file regarding the two Al-Qaeda operatives was paused for the time being. Fuller was rather new to the terrorism squad and was already overwhelmed. By the time Fuller opened up the Al-Midhar and Al-Hazmi file, it was September 4th, 2001. Fuller begins by typing in the names of both men on the Keyring Choice Point database. The Choice Point is one of several companies maintaining commercial databases on personal information about U.S. citizens. According to Fuller, nothing comes up on either of the two men. He explains to an internal review years later that this was due in part to the many different variations of the names. However, in 2003, the 9/11 Commission concluded that the database regarding both Al-Midhar and Al-Hazmi was not performed. They also add, searches of readily made available databases could have been unearthed, their California driver's licenses, car registrations, and telephone listings. September 10th, 2001, Nawaf Al-Hazmi and Hani Hanjour are preparing to send an express mail package with an alias, Raouf Al-Dog, sending to Sharjah, the United Arab Emirates. They prepared this package at 6:57 a.m. The address they used, 1565 Washington Boulevard, number 8, Laurel, Maryland. The recipient of the package was to Mustafa al-Hassawi, a known al-Qaeda financier. The package was later intercepted by the FBI, and inside was Khalid Al-Midhar's debit card and PIN for the First Union bank account, which contained $9,000, for which they would have no use for it. During the afternoon, Hani Hanjour, Khalid Al-Midhar, and Nawaf Al-Hazmi would check in the Marriott Residence Inn located in Herndon, Virginia. only 6 miles from Dulles International Airport. Almost as soon as they checked in, a prominent Saudi official and director of the SAR Foundation, which is a Saudi-owned company, a flagship corporation representing charities, think tanks, and business entities, had also checked in. Salah ibn Abdulrahman Hussein was known in downtown Washington, D.C. in the Arab community. Its high affluent end, of course. Hussein, just the day before, had previously rented a nearby hotel, also in Herndon, with his wife in tow. Both had entered the United States on August 20th on a tour of Islamic charity organizations in local spots in Virginia and Washington, D.C. On the evening of September 10th, Eric Gill, a Pakistan native living inside the United States, was working the evening shift security supervisor, Dulles International Airport. Gill, an employee of Oregon Bright Security, was stationed at the airport's west checkpoint, which leads to the passengers area, whom were previously screened by security and where the tarmac was located as well. Stationed along next to Gill was another Oregon Bright Security employee, Nicholas Da Silva. Gill notices 5 men near the side door near the west checkpoint, where access is limited to those with security passes. Gill sees 3 of the men dressed in unkempt United Airlines ramp workers' clothing. 2 of the men did not have passes and were dressed in casual civilian attire. Gill notices the 3 men using their security cards to enter the checkpoint and trying to escort the 2 who did not. Gill saw this and stopped them almost immediately upon their entry and asked if they were employees of the airline. He was met with unpleasant admonishment. The men told Gill to fuck off and say that they are important people. But Gill still refuses to let the 2 without passes entering. And eventually, all 5 of the men would retreat. At 10 p.m., Gill's shift had ended, and the west checkpoint at this juncture was insecure at this time, with only 1 roving security guard nearby. September 11, 2001, at 7:15 a.m., Dulles International Airport, Majid Makid and Khalid Al-Midar had checked in at the American Airlines ticket counter. At Dulles, the computer-assisted passenger pre-screening system, known as CAPS, is implemented for a database search of the FBI's high-risk names. This information is used to check against some data storage and assign a terrorism risk score to that person. Both Makid and Al-Midar were chosen for a second security screening in which both men had passed. Makid's luggage carry-on bag is also screened and cleared. However, it would not be loaded on the plane in time. Their appearance on a Verint camera system showed the men going through initial security screening through a metal detector. There would be some contention that the video is undated. However, in the same video is a victim of Flight 77, Marie Ray Sapper, identified by her mother days later, holding a red cargo ammo holder with her cat. Nawaf al-Hazmi and Salim al-Hazmi would check in together at 7:29 a.m., with its suspected pilot, Hani Hanjour, checking in at 7:35 a.m. Salim al-Hazmi successfully clears the metal detector and is permitted through the checkpoint. Nawaf al-Hazmi sets off both alarms for both the first and second metal detectors and is subsequently subjected to a personal screening with a metal detector hand wand before being passed. His shoulder bag is swiped by an explosive trace detector and returned without further inspection. Inside the pilot's cabinet at Flight 77 was Captain Charles Burlingame and First Officer David Charlebois, who were beginning their long flight to Los Angeles International Airport. They had a short passenger manifest. 53 souls were to be on board. Flight attendants to service the flight were Jennifer Lewis, Renee May, Michelle Heidenberger, and Kenneth Lewis. The flight, however, was suspended for 10 minutes and took out at 8:20 a.m. out of runway 30. The air traffic control had kept in constant contact with Burlingame and Charlebois. The final transmission for Flight 77 was noted at 8:50 a.m. and 51 seconds. Quote, direct Falmouth, American 77, thanks. End quote. After that, the ATC will repeat the same command multiple times with no response. American 77 Indy, how do you read? 3 of the other hijacked flights have reports of bombs, knives, and people have been stabbed, but Flight 77 will be the only hijacked incident which didn't have reports, and that those included terrible instances. No hijackings, along with this one, had the anomalies like this plane. At 9:12 a.m., flight attendant Renee May had to use her cell phone to call her mother. May would state that the plane was being hijacked by 6 men and not 5, as the 9/11 Commission report stated in their final report. She also stated the staff and air passengers had been moved to the rear of the airplane. The call lasted only 2 minutes. At 9:16 a.m. and 9:26, passenger Barbara Olson called her husband Ted Olson and reported that the airplane had been hijacked and that the assailants had box cutters and knives. However, another call was made, this time from an unidentified female aboard Flight 77. This turned out to be Barbara Olson. The call was placed to an AT&T operator, Mercy Lorenzo, who took the call, in which she would inform her supervisor, Teresa Gonzalez, who in turn notified the FBI. The caller informed Gonzalez that the plane was hijacked by people who had knives and guns, who directed all passengers to retreat in the back of the plane. The unnamed caller in the FBI 302 interview of Mercy Gonzalez was from Barbara Olson. At 8:56 a.m., the flight's transporter had been shut off. Whoever was piloting the plane engaged the autopilot. Meanwhile, ATC operators were trying to locate Flight 77 while also dealing with a multi-hijacking scenario. American Airlines managers Craig Markey, Craig Parfit, Joe Bertapel, and Mike Malarkey had all trouble contacting anyone at the FAA Command Center in Herndon, Virginia. All 4 men would later testify before the 9/11 Commission that they all lost precious minutes in building the communications bridge between Special Operations Command and the command center. At 9:29, while at an altitude of 7,000 feet and approximately 30 miles from Ronald Reagan Airport, Flight 77's autopilot and autothrottle were disengaged. Immediately, operators contacted a nearby C-130 Hercules Lockheed plane operated by Lieutenant Colonel Stephen O'Brien, in which he noticed and was notified by FAA in nearby Washington, D.C. They asked O'Brien if he could locate a Boeing 757-200 Airbus, which was located nearby. O'Brien, through the low clouds, did indeed notice the plane and relayed the information back to FAA. They asked O'Brien to keep in visual contact of the flight in which to steer clear of. And at 9:37 a.m., O'Brien notified FAA operators he saw the plane in the vicinity of the Pentagon and a subsequent fireball immediately after it. The Flight 77 impact and immediate aftermath were described in fuller detail by Rick Newman and Patrick Creed's excellent book, Firefight, Inside the Battle to Save the Pentagon on 9/11. Quote, the instant its nose struck the outer wall of the Pentagon, Flight 77 ceased to be an airplane. The nose of the plane hit the facade just below the top of the first story, about 14 feet above ground, going 530 miles per hour. A deafening boom shook the morning as a violent concussion tore through the air, jarring bystanders. The collision produced a force on the passengers far greater than that from any high-speed air car crash. People became projectiles, bones separated from flesh. Body parts flew as if it fired from a cannon. When it hit the building, the fuselage crumpled immediately. Its soft aluminum disintegrated as it encountered layers of limestone, brick, concrete. A blast resented geotextile lining, the steel reinforced concrete columns that held up the building and everything else in its path. In an instant, the impact reduced Flight 77 to 1 million superheated fragments. 2/3 of the right wing had been severed by the impact, with the construction equipment and what was left of it carved a gash in the building's second-story floor slab before the concrete sheared it off from the fuselage. At least 1/3 of the left wing had snapped off when the left engine hit the steam vault. The rest of it slid into the Pentagon beneath the second-story floor slab, penetrating no further than a few feet. The airplane's tail, 45 feet tall, was still attached to the airplane as it plowed into the Pentagon, but like the stubs of the wings, its soft aluminum was abruptly shredded when it collided with concrete. The horizontal stabilizers, the smaller wings at the back of the plane, didn't make much of an impact either. They may have penetrated farther than the front wings since they were being dragged into a hole, but they too broke apart quickly. The aircraft was carrying 5,300 gallons of fuel in 3 fuel tanks, one in the fuselage and one in each wing. The wing tanks were spewing fuel before the plane even struck the building. At the moment of impact, about 720 gallons of fuel ignited outside the building, sending a fireball twice the height of the Pentagon up to the roof and out in every direction. Fire instantly charred grass and tree lining outside the water wall. Burning wreckage flew across the lawn. Chunks of metal rained down. A mushroom cloud followed the high blast into the sky. As the belly of the plane penetrated the first floor, another 4,450 gallons of fuel exploded in the blast, far more powerful than the initial fireball. The massive concussion obliterated what was left of the airplane. Shock waves hurtled down hallways. Part of the second-story concrete floor slab buckled like a bent flap on a cardboard box. Fuel spewed into every space that physics would allow. Much of it lit off instantaneously as fire raced through office space, air vents, and stairwells at nearly the speed of sound. End quote. The damage to the Pentagon was extensive. Just before its impact, 5 street light poles had broken away at its base, which it was designed to do in case of car impacts. It also struck a portable generator, in which created a smoke trail seconds before its impact into the Pentagon. There were 87 personal eyewitness accounts who were in the close proximity of the plane's impact into the Pentagon structure. Multiple agencies responded to the crash site, which included Arlington Fire Department, Fort Myer Fire Department, Ronald Reagan National Airport Fire Department, District of Columbia Fire Department, Fairfax and Montgomery Urban Search and Rescue, Fort Belvoir Transport Division, the Virginia Medical Technician Team, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Hundreds upon hundreds of investigators searched the area for evidence, in which they found thousands of the plane's debris and also many bodies, dismembered body parts. Kevin Rimrod, a Navy photographer surveying the Navy Command Center after the attacks, remarked that there were so many bodies, I'd almost step on them. So I'd have to really take care to look backwards as I'm backing up in the dark, looking through a flashlight, making sure I'm not stepping on somebody. Thousands of pieces of the plane also carried forward and up, even up over the roof of the Pentagon and into the Pentagon's in the courtyard, where very small pieces of aluminum drifted down like confetti. Other pieces landed on the roof. These bits of the plane debris were noticed by members of the Fort Myer and Arlington Fire Department, in which Arlington Battalion Chief Jason Schwartz was on site and was the commander. Carlton Burkhammer, Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Station 14, saw parts of the plane as well as many of the dead on the first floor. He pointed out that he saw in particular lime green pieces of the interior of the plane. You could tell where the plane had gone because of the destruction of the steel and concrete beams. Burkhammer would also find the black boxes belonging to Flight 77, according to an MSNBC article. Quote, early Friday morning, shortly before 4 a.m., Burkhammer and another firefighter, Brian Morovitz, were combing through the debris near the impact site. Peering at the wreckage of their helmet lights, the two spotted an intact seat from the plane's cockpit with a chunk of the floor still attached. They also saw 2 odd-shaped dark boxes about 1.5 by 2 feet long. They've been told the plane's black boxes would be in fact bright orange, but these were charred black. The boxes had handles on one end and one was torn open. They cordoned off the area and called an FBI agent, who in turn called from someone from the National Transportation Safety Board, who confirmed the find. The black boxes were from American Airlines Flight 77. We wanted to find live victims, says Burkhammer, but this was a consolation prize. Finding the black box gives us a little boost, end quote. Meanwhile, Eric Gill was out shopping with his family when he heard that an American Airlines plane had impacted the Pentagon. Gill hurriedly returns to work, and 2 days later, the FBI come to interview him after hearing of the September 10th incident. Gill tells his story to the FBI, but the FBI fails to show him a video it had found of the hijackers passing through an airport security checkpoint on September 11th, even though it is shown to all his colleagues except his partner who was on duty, De Silva. The agents show him poor quality photograph pictures of the hijackers, and Gill identifies 2 of them, as the people he saw on September 10th, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Marwan al-Shehi, with al-Hazmi hurling the insults at Gil. The FBI agents also immediately lose interest in Gil, for al-Shehi was not involved in Flight 77 hijacking, but was suspected of being involved in the United Airlines Flight 179 hijacking, in which Shehi was acting as its alleged pilot, in which it was crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Over a year and a half later, Gil would have a telephone interview with the 9/11 Commission staffers about his incident, in which nothing would become of it. Not then or since. Gil remains adamant in him personally seeing al-Hazmi and al-Shehi, however, years later. Meanwhile, FBI investigators who have begun the largest investigation in the agency history, Pentagon, would have two agents visit the Saudi official who rented a room at the married residence in Herndon, Salah ibn Abdul Rahman Hussein, in which he lived at the same hotel Hanjur al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi all stayed in on September 10th. As a woman agent questioned him, Hussein feigned a seizure and was rushed to a hospital in which they found absolutely nothing wrong with him, and he was released. The agent recommended that Hussein should not be allowed to leave until a follow-up interview could occur. The next day, the same agents returned to question him, but Hussein was rather unhelpful to his inquiries, even stammering a bit about meeting with al-Midar. When the agents leave, Hussein calls the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C., and they would in turn call the FBI. According to authors Susan and Joe Trento in their book, Unsafe at Any Altitude, high-level Saudi contacts inside the embassy called the U.S. Saudi ambassador, Prince Bandar bin Sultan Al Saud, which notifies the FBI superiors in Washington, D.C. to not have the agents interview or confront Hussein again. On September 19, 2001, Hussein was allowed to leave the United States, along with many other highly important Saudi nationals, on private charters back to Riyadh Airport, Saudi Arabia. One day after the attacks, FBI investigators were notified of a suspicious vehicle in the Dulles International Airport parking garage. The car, a 1988 Toyota Corolla, was registered to a Nawaf al-Hazmi with a residence showing an address in Lemon Grove, California. It was the same address in which they lived with another Saudi who was also an FBI informant. His name was Abdussadah Sheikh, and he reported to an FBI agent, Stephen Butler, whom Sheikh informed about renting to two Saudis who just moved into the United States but never gave Butler their full names. Inside the car, in which it was searched thoroughly, many incriminating items were found, including 4 color diagrams of an instrument panel for a B-757 aircraft, 1 yellow and black utility knife, 1 Pan Am International Flight Academy Jet Tech International Phoenix, Arizona identification card in the name of Hani Hanjour, a cashier's check to the Flight Academy in the amount of $5,455 from Hanjour, a travel itinerary for seats 13A and 13B for Khalid al-Midar and Majid Makid on American Airlines Flight 77, a piece of paper with the name Osama 589-5316, a packing slip of package sent by Rauf al-Dog at 1565 Washington Boulevard, Laurel, Maryland. In 2004, the FBI Office of the Inspector General found no fault on the part of Robert Fuller, the inexperienced agent from the counterterrorism unit who was tasked with finding information regarding Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, in which it was detailed a high-profile case. The Office of Inspector General issued its report, quote, as discussed above, on August 22nd, 2001, the FBI learned that al-Midar and al-Hazmi had entered the United States in January of 2000, that al-Midar had again flown to New York on July 4th, 2001, and that there was no record of either of them leaving the country. The FBI also learned that Khalid had been identified in the Kuala Lumpur photographs. Upon discovery of this information, the FBI opened an intelligence investigation in New York in an effort to locate al-Midar and al-Hazmi. Once again, however, the separation between intelligence and criminal information affected who could receive access to the information about both men. This interpretation of the wall also hampered the ability of the FBI New York agents working on the Cole investigation to participate in the search for al-Hazmi and al-Midar. In addition, we found that the FBI efforts to locate al-Hazmi and al-Midar were not extensive. We do not fault the case agent assigned to locating them. He was new and not instructed to give the case any priority. Rather, we found that the FBI New York did not pursue this as an urgent matter or assign many resources to it. End quote. The repeated excuses would not end here in regards to the FBI's handling of the September 11 hijackers, as the CIA would also undergo similar internal investigations. Yet not a single member of either agency was ever found to be held accountable for their acts of malfeasance, negligence, or even willful ignorance on the matter of monitoring the suspects involved in the September 11th attacks. And that included the CIA case agents at the virtual station, the Bin Laden issue station, codename Alex Station, in which it was reported that the CIA had information regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar and Wafa Hazmi entering the United States. When FBI agents Mark Rossini and Doug Miller tried to inform Washington, D.C. headquarters about receiving this information and about both men having a U.S. dual visa, and upon entry to California, they were not allowed to share this information. Tom Wilshire, the deputy chief of Alex Station, through Michelle Ann Casey, his third in command, told the men that they were not to share the information with the FBI because this was not an FBI matter and that the next attack was not going to be a domestic one, rather one in Malaysia or Southeast Asia. The both men were pressured not to report the information to the FBI headquarters for fear that they might face prosecution for sharing information with an agency that was not allowed to have the information shared with them. It was all legal proceedings and bureaucracy, or was it something more?